waiting for Miss Arias.
No,
She's here?
she's here.
Oh, okay, I could not see her behind the screen. All right, we're on the record. The record will show the presence of the defendant and all counsel. The jury is not present. Mr. Nurmi.
Actually, may we approach, Your Honor?
You may. After speaking with counsel at the bench, we are going to take matters out of order. Ms. Wong, would you please come forward? Right up here to be sworn.
Raise your right hand. You do solemnly swear the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes, I do. Thank you. Please walk right around here and take a seat. Mr. Nurmi, you may proceed.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good morning, Ms. Wong.
Morning.
Could you state your name for the record, please?
Grace Wong,
And Ms. Wong, for whom are you employed?
Turner Broadcasting.
And in your, may we approach, Your Honor?
Yes. Mr. Nurmi, why don't you try again and see if you continue to get the feedback.
Okay. Ms. Wong, in case it wasn't clear, for whom are you employed?
I'm employed by Turner Broadcasting.
Okay. And in your capacity in working for Turner Broadcasting, have you been covered? Well, let me ask you this before I do that. What is your job title with Turner Broadcasting?
Senior Field Producer.
Okay. And as your job capacity as senior field producer, have you been covering the trial proceedings, State versus JodiApril?
Yes, I have.
Okay. And when did you begin your coverage of these proceedings?
I'm not exactly sure of the exact date, but it was the first day of jury selection.
Okay. So you've been here since jury selection and nearly every day at the trial, is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. And in your capacity covering this trial, you've been in the gallery most of these days, is that correct?
Yes.
And making observations of the trial to report on those?
Yes.
Okay. And in that regard, are you familiar with the jurors, at least in terms of facial recognition?
I'm familiar with the jurors that I can see from where I sit.
Okay. In terms of the jurors you can see from where you sit, do you know the numbers of those jurors that you're able to see?
Most of them, yes.
Okay, could you recite those for us?
Juror number 1, juror number 2, juror number 3, juror number 4, juror number 5, juror number 9, juror number 18, juror number 17. Most of the jurors, but, you know, I'm not exactly sure. I mean, if you gave me a test to match, I think those are the numbers that match the faces that I remember.
Okay. You don't think, you said most of them after you cited off a number, so are there other numbers that you recognize, or?
Well, I know them by face,
Okay.
so that's how I remember them. But you know, now that I'm recalling their numbers, you know, I'd have to sort of see their face again.
Okay. Are there certain jurors you feel like you're blocked from seeing? Is that what you're telling us?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
And do you know where those jurors are seated?
Yes, most of them.
Where are they seated, the ones you cannot see?
The juror number 10.
Okay. So juror number 10 is really the only one you may not recognize by face. Is that correct?
Yeah, and juror number and juror number 1, I'm not exactly sure.
Okay. Now, Ms. Wong, prior to these proceedings, it's my understanding that you got to review what has been marked as Exhibit number 2, correct?
Correct.
And could you describe for us what was contained in Exhibit number 2?
If it's the exhibit that I'm thinking about, it's a package that was produced by one of CNN's affiliate stations, and it's a story about the prosecutor being treated like a celebrity.
Okay. And just so we're clear, because you kind of qualified it a bit, I can show you what's been marked, if I may approach, Your Honor.
Okay.
Exhibit number 2. You reviewed that recently with your attorney, did you not?
Yes, I did.
Okay. And this is the disc that contains the video that, the story you were speaking of, correct?
Correct.
And you were seen in this video, were you not?
Yes.
Okay. And in terms of your observations that day, did you observe this behavior on part of Mr. Martinez?
Yes.
Okay. Did you see him taking photographs with members of the public?
Yes.
And did you see him signing autographs?
Yes.
Okay. The video that we see here, I believe, only demonstrates him signing one autograph. Were there other autographs that he signed to your what you were able to see?
Yes.
Okay. And we saw a couple photographs being taken of him in this story. Did he take photographs of more people that were not contained in this video?
Yes.
Did you, having walked by this and being a reporter, I take it this would be something of interest to you, would it not?
Yes.
Okay. And in that regard, did you, I noticed when in the video you were walking by, but did you stand and take a few minutes to observe these festivities?
Yes.
Do you have any knowledge of how long this show went on?
A few minutes.
Okay. And going back to the other question, it's about the jurors and the ones you recognized, did you recognize any jurors being in the area to have witnessed any of this?
No.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Wong. Judge, I would move to have exhibit number 2 admitted.
Any
For the
objection?
purposes of this hearing.
Exhibit 2 is admitted for purposes of this hearing only. Cross-examination.
I don't have any questions, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Wong. You may step down. Court will hear argument on the motion after we have completed the Daubert hearing. Mr. Nermi, you may call your witness for that hearing.
Yes, Your Honor, and before we do so, we ask that Ms. Arias be able to take a seat probably in the jury box would be best, so she can view what is happening on the screen.
Yes, you may walk up and take a seat in the jury box.
And as it relates to the witness, we would call Brian Neumeister.
Judge, if you could also have these two in the next, can sit in the jury box so they can also see.
Yes. Mr. Neumeister, you were previously sworn in this case. You are still under oath. You may take a seat in the witness stand. Oh, well, is there any objection to him testifying standing at the box?
I'm not sure why you would want to stand at which box.
He wants to stand right there so that he can operate the machinery.
Oh, sure.
All right, you may stand to
And Judge,
testify.
my understanding is that we will need to alter the lighting, is that correct? Because it's barely visible at this point.
Okay.
And actually, Judge, if we could have this as well. Are you ready, Brian? Are you ready? Okay. Could you state your name for the record, please?
Norbert Brian Neumeister.
Okay.
I just told him that he's still under oath. It's not,
Oh, but that's not hooked up to this.
right, but I need to make sure that this is working properly. Are you going to be using the,
I am, because
Elmo
we
also?
have the marked exhibit version of this that.
okay, then I need to make sure. There it goes. Okay. You may proceed.
Thank you. And Mr. Neumeister, before we proceed into the work you did relating this to this photograph we see here as Exhibit 159, if you could take a look at the exhibit on the screen.
I'm seeing it on the screen here.
Okay. And you're familiar with Exhibit 159?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Counsel, he has to speak up. Yes, sir.
And before we, like I said, before we go into the work you did on Exhibit 159, I want to go back into your background well, let me ask you this. Is there a simple explanation that you can provide to this that would describe the work you did on Exhibit 159?
To stay within Daubert standards, I did very simple like enlargement. I didn't do a lot of fancy tricks, basically. I multiplied.
Excuse me, Mr. Neumeister, the court reporter is having difficulty hearing you. I'm not sure this is going to work.
Maybe if he could testify and then come down when he needs to? Or?
Okay, perfect. We're going to give you a handheld
Oh,
microphone.
actually, Brian.
This may assist you.
Oh, thank you.
Let's try this.
Check.
This video and enhancement, enlargement, let's talk about your background in the video enhancement enlargement. How long have you been working in that field?
I've been working professionally with cameras since the 1980s.
Okay.
I'm sorry, we're going to need to try a different microphone. Try that one. It's
No,
not
that
on
one's-
yet. You
that
need to
one's-
flip the switch.
One, two.
Okay, let's try it again.
Okay. I'm gonna ask the same question again. As to your experience in video enhancement and enlargement, how long have you been working in this field?
I've been working professionally since 1980.
And in terms of your background or training in doing video enhancement and enlargements, could you describe that for us?
Well, my dad was a executive at the National Broadcasting Company for 33 years, so I sort of grew up in the engineering department at NBC Television in Burbank. I began using still cameras.
Can we,
Yeah, it's very difficult.
You want to just come up there?
I think we're going to need to have you sit in the witness stand. So, Mr. Martinez, I guess you can stand on this side of the courtroom. All right, sir, have a seat.
Mike, did you get that? Sir, Mr. Newmeister, I'm going to have you begin anew, at least with your education and training as it relates to video enhancement or enlargement.
I'm not sure if you got this earlier, so I'll just reiterate. I grew up with my dad being an executive at the National Broadcasting Company in Burbank, California for the network. So I had access to, it's kind of my second home away from home, working in the studios and hanging out with the engineers and working with the high-end camera, just kind of as a trainee, and they kind of took me under their wing. After that, as far as starting to work with cameras, the cameras that I started out with in the 70s were high-end cameras like Hasselblad and Leica. They're very high-end cameras.
Okay.
Throughout the 80s, I worked with really excellent photographers like Niall Latham, Tom Grzinski, Bill Wallner, mostly all in Hasselblad and Mamiya format. At the same time, I was working a lot with professional video cameras for KPNX television here in Phoenix.
And as it relates to enhancing or enlarging an image, when did you begin working on that aspect forensically?
For magazines like Arizona Highways, for different things, they wanted images cropped. And originally it wasn't done with Photoshop, it was done with enlargers. But again, these are the film days. We're talking about digital cameras right now. So we began cropping probably in the early 80s, cropping negatives and or actually prints.
Okay. And when you mentioned the difference between digital and film, when did digital really come into prominence?
Well, it's kind of still, working its way in. There are those who feel that shooting, for example, on film, shooting Panavision has its proponents. Shooting on what's called a red or a Cinealta has its proponents. So it's still coming in. It's probably 5 years ago you could say that it started actually making a dent, where it started really cutting into the film market.
Okay. And in terms of enhancing digital photography, and what we're looking at here in 159 is a digital photograph, is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. In terms of enhancing digital photographs, what training and experience do you have in that regard?
I've worked as a beta tester for a number of software companies that develop stuff beyond Photoshop. In other words, Clear ID, forensic, basically components that are made for forensic purposes. As far as working with Photoshop, I've worked with it since it first came out to the latest edition. It's fairly straightforward. It's good for doing portraits, family work, but it's not.
Please approach. We've got a 2-minute recess while we make some adjustments. Mind coming back up to the witness stand? We're going to try the equipment with you on the stand, see if we can make some adjustments.
Check, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, checking. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10.
Mr. Nermy?
Yeah, I mean, I can hear pretty clear if the court.
That was better. I did adjust it a little bit myself. That's what I did. All right, thank you. If you wouldn't mind staying for just a few minutes while we start the hearing, and if we have any other issues, you can assist us. Thank you. All right, we're back on the record. Mr. Nermy, you may continue.
Mr. Newmeister, if memory serves, we were in the middle of discussing your background and education experience as it relates to enhancing digital photography. And I'm not sure that it came across very clear. You talked about using a Photoshop program. Is that correct?
Actually, the program we mostly use for forensic analysis is called Clear ID. It uses Photoshop as a basic starting off, jumping off point.
Okay.
But it takes it a lot farther. It uses a lot more CPU and a lot more GPU. And it does a lot of things that you really can't do with Photoshop. We do use Photoshop for general applications. We do have lots of plugins, which are ancillary programs that work with Photoshop. But when you're doing an enhancement for court, especially with the face, you have to be very careful about what you use. For example, if we were doing a license plate, I could do what's called pushing it a lot farther. We use what's called pixel stacking or frame averaging. When you're using a human face, you want to keep it as simple as possible as not to introduce artifacts into your work. In other words, basically, this is a straightforward enlargement without a lot of bells and whistles.
Okay. In that regard, you mentioned using this enhanced software and you said CPU and GPU, if I heard you correctly, is
Yes.
that right?
Correct.
What are those acronyms for?
The CPU is, in our case, it's a water-cooled 12-core processor for processing the data. It's basically the heart of your computer. The GPU is the graphics card, and we use what's called a twice HD resolution graphics card. So the reason a lot of homicide detectives and whatnot come up to our lab is they can see stuff a lot clearer than with their systems due to the nature of our equipment.
Okay. Well, let's before we go into that aspect of it, have you testified in Maricopa County Superior Court regarding video enhancement enlargements prior to today?
Not specifically enlargements, but I have worked on photos where they were enlarged, but they didn't ask me specifically how did I enlarge them.
Okay. But you've testified in Maricopa County about enlargements you've done, correct?
Oh, yes.
Okay. And would you say, how many times would you say? Do you have any idea?
I actually don't testify that much most of the time because it doesn't matter if the defense or the prosecution gives me the evidence. About right now, I've got about a dozen cases that are with homicide or with the DA's office, prosecutor's office, and about the same amount with public defender's office, OPDS, here in Arizona. Most of the time, I am just asked to provide the evidence and I don't try to garner anything from the evidence. I present it to the attorneys for them to work with. In other words, I enhance it, clean it up, and present it. And I don't try to stipulate what's in the photos or make any interpretations of them. I just present them.
Okay. And in terms of these presentations, have you also worked in federal court cases as well or testified in those cases?
Yes.
Okay. Do you have any idea how many times you've done that?
The longest federal court case I had was, I think, the Charles Keating cases, which were, I think, they were 80 days.
And did you do video enhancement in that case or audio enhancement?
I did video and stills.
Okay. And was there a certification as an expert that you went through in those federal cases?
No.
Okay.
It's just experience of doing it every day for 30 years. The problem is, with a lot of so-called experts, they give them a machine, something that we may have worked as a beta tester on, which is a very simple machine, and they'll take a law enforcement officer, send them through a 30-day course, and call him an expert. When you've been working with high-end equipment for 30 years, you learn a lot by trial and error what works and what doesn't work. You also learn to work with the software manufacturers to create evidence or to create equipment or software that can better enhance evidence. We're on the phone quite often with manufacturers about glitches in software or whatnot.
Now, you mentioned you work for both the prosecution and the defense in Maricopa County. Do you also work for the prosecution and defense outside of Maricopa County? We've talked about federal cases.
Yes, I'm working for the U.S. Army this week for the CID prosecution.
Okay. And do you currently have any cases pending with the Mesa Police Department?
Yes, I'm representing the Mesa Police Department in a case.
Okay. All right. Now, what I want to talk to you about specifically, you started mentioning a few moments ago about the uniqueness, I guess, it will be my word, of the work you do when you're enlarging a picture of a human face, as we see here in Exhibit 159. Could you describe that for the court?
I'll just step back a bit. We have a federal case last week we were working on, and when working with the faces, I had to make sure that we had 4 different technicians working on this. We even had one of the gentlemen from the Saddam Hussein trial, a very high-end group of people working on that case. We have to make sure that we don't push a human face too far, because when you start increasing contrast, resolution, and again, by increasing resolution, that's a whole different ball of wax I can get into if you want to, but basically, you can cause artifacts or shadows that aren't there. Now again, if a typical situation I would get is a homicide detective would bring up a license plate or something off of a surveillance video, we would use different techniques where we can push the envelope a little farther, but on faces, to stay within Daubert, we don't modify them very much.
Okay. And how about when you're looking at, in general, before we go into Exhibit 159, the lens that's taking the photograph, does that affect your ability to enhance or enlarge a photograph?
There's a number of things. First of all, you're looking at the pixel size. So this particular camera was an 8.1 megapixel camera. It's a consumer camera. It's got a consumer lens on it. It's a Zeiss lens. That particular camera uses what's called a Bions processor, one of the earlier ones that Sony was using. It's not a bad home camera. It shoots low-end video. It shoots a decent snapshot. That particular picture, and I don't know the reference number to it.
Well, again, what I want to do is before we get into this particular, and I have an exhibit to show you,
Okay.
but how when you're looking at the lens and the camera, is that something you account for when you look at the enlargements that you do onto somebody's face?
Sure. There's things called bokeh. There's lens barreling, which is basically for example, on a wide-angle lens, you'll notice it's not what's called rectilinear. If you shoot something with a wide-angle lens, instead of straight lines on the edge, you'll notice they're curved.
Okay.
So you start looking for that, as it may affect the actual picture that you're working with.
Could you define for us rectilinear?
If you were to shoot a chip chart, which is a bunch of squares basically, which is used for registering cameras, mostly video cameras, but you also use them. We use Pantone charts.
Okay.
You shoot it, and there's square lines on it. Now, with what we call a rectilinear 50, which means that the lines on a 50 millimeter lens, a prime lens, all the lines will be horizontal and vertical when it's printed. If you start using something like a 16 to, well, I would say it depends on the camera, but let's say you used a 10 millimeter lens, which is basically a semi-fisheye, you would begin to see almost the effect that when you look through your peephole in your doorway, you see the bowing effect.
Okay.
It gives you a wider picture, but it distorts the edges. And when the lines aren't straight, it's not rectilinear. In other words, if any point, and it usually happens towards the horizontal edges of the picture, you'll notice that on a wide-angle lens, the trees or the houses or whatever may be warped a little bit in.
Okay. As it relates to, without going specifically into the work you did on 159 again, in terms of reflections that we see in photographs, is it common for a photograph to have some sort of reflection?
It would depend on what you're shooting against.
Okay. Well, let's talk specifically about the cornea as we have here, and we won't go into the specifics of it, but also when you're assessing the photograph or reflection in a cornea, how do you account for the curvature of the eye, if at all?
Okay, there's two things you need to take account there, and I will have to refer to this specific picture if you don't mind.
Sure, we're referring to, and for the record, Judge, on his screen also is 159. I see the screen is not, oh, there we go. Go ahead.
When you're shooting into, I've shot an awful lot of product shots, especially with sunglasses, and they're very tough because they reflect everything that they see. And if it's a curved sunglass, you notice if you take a picture of sunglasses very often, you have a picture of a photographer in there, or people standing on the outside, or the lighting crew, or whatnot for product shots. When you're shooting something, for example, off of the eye, you would have to take into effect the shape of the cornea and the bow of the lens. So was the lens rectilinear? What is the exact shape of the cornea?
Okay. And going specifically into your work here, having the experience and knowledge and training with this, you did all that in this case. Is that correct?
No, it was impossible to do actually. What you would do with Mr. Alexander is you would actually have to map the eye to get an exact curvature, because what you've got is basal tears which cover the cornea, causing the reflection. The reason this photograph that we were able to blow it up is because it was taken with the lens set at 16 millimeters, which is wide,
Okay.
on what's called a 1.025 chip, which is, I hope we don't have to get into the sizes of chips, but on the, it's a 1.25 format chip, which is 8 megabytes. I had enough pixel data to be able to zoom in and get what is reflected in the eye. Okay. And all I did was basically use a bicubic smoothing algorithm, which would not cause stair stepping. The other thing I did was I upgraded I went from an 8-bit format, which is native of that camera, to a 16-bit format to blow it up. And the reason you do that is it prevents what's called color stair stepping. It makes the color smoother without augmenting the image at all.
Okay. Your Honor, if I may approach? Mr. Newmeister, I'm going to show you what's been marked Exhibit 1 for the purposes of this hearing. Do you recognize that document?
Yes.
And what is that?
That's the metadata that came from the exemplar that's on the screen.
Okay. And is that what you created, or what was?
It actually is on every photo that comes out of a camera. You'll have the metadata on it. So what I did is I just took it and copied it and put it down for reference so that the court would have a record of basically the shutter speed, the date, the ISO. The ISO is the light, in other words, the light speed, the maximum aperture, the pixel size, and if there was a flash that fired, and the DPI level. And it also has the date of the photograph on there, if the camera was set correctly, the clock on the camera. And I did not inspect the camera, so I wouldn't know.
I would move to admit Exhibit 1.
No objection.
Exhibit 1 is admitted for purposes of this hearing only.
Now, sir, drawing your attention to the work you did in this case, we talked about a reflection you were able to obtain from Mr. Alexander's cornea, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And why were you, this might be too broad a question, but basically, can you tell us why you were able to obtain a reflection out of his eyeball?
It's actually a very good question. There's a number of things in photography that are critical. One is how many PPI, which is pixels per inch, is available. And then also, because the person holding the camera shot with the camera low with the flash on, the white shower background acted as what we call a bounce. In the industry, we call it a foam core. but it acted as a bounce. So given the speed of light and the 1/50th shutter speed, what happened basically is the light left the flash, bounced off the shower enclosure, and lit the subject taking the picture.
So, based on everything you've told us, is there a way for you to estimate how far the photographer was from the subject of the photograph?
To do it accurately, you'd have to have a mapping of his eye, and then I would have to take the axial camera and map the camera lens, because many of these cameras have numerous different optics inside or different lenses inside, and very often there can be optical error, there could be misalignment. So without analyzing the camera and looking at the exact shape of the cornea, I could say within a few feet, but I couldn't say within how many inches.
Okay. And that, the few feet, not getting to an exact inch, that few feet would be determined how?
Well, again, there's a couple of ways. One of the things you're looking at is bokeh, which is the distortion of the background.
Okay.
There's not a lot of bokeh in here. In other words, there's not a lot of depth of field. Normally, when you shoot portraits, you use a fairly long prime lens, maybe an 80 or a 105, something like that, so that the picture of the person is in focus, but the background it looks blurry and soft and more palatable. This was shot 16 millimeters, basically, because it says on the actual metadata that to shoot with 16 millimeter and get a full face like that, you'd have to be fairly close.
I want to, if I may approach again, Your Honor.
You may.
I want to show you what's been marked as Exhibit 2 for purposes of this hearing. Could you take a look at that, sir?
Yes.
And could you tell us what that photograph represents?
That is an enlargement at the stock 72 DPI, or PPI, basically, or DPI rather, of the eye. And what I did is I left it at 72 DPI the first time around. The only thing I changed was I increased the bit depth to 16-bit. And briefly to explain, an 8-bit picture has the availability to produce about 16.8 million colors. 16-bit, you're into the trillions of colors as to how many colors you can get. What that prevents is when you're going from red to pink to different colors, it prevents when you blow it up from the colors from being choppy. It smooths it out. So anytime you're dealing with a forensic photo, you'd want to go up to a 16-bit. So basically, it's at the stock DPI at 16-bit.
All right. And this is the eye we see as reflected in Exhibit 159. This is a focus on that.
On Mr.
left eye?
Alexander's left eye.
Okay. I'd move to admit Exhibit number 2 for purposes of this hearing.
No objection.
Exhibit 2 is admitted for purposes of this hearing only.
And Mr. Neumeister, perhaps if you could be so kind as to, you have Exhibit number 2 on your slides.
I stepped down.
Focusing in on, this is a reflection of the left eye as depicted in Exhibit 159, correct?
Mr. Alexander's left eye, correct.
Okay. And could you tell us what we see? You said you enhanced it to 720?
No, on that particular, it's what's called 72 DPI, which was the stock DPI that came from the camera. That's dots per inch, and it has to do with printer, not the camera. It's an output format.
All right. And based on, from this point in time, we can see what can we see? I mean, can you make any conclusions from just this?
Well, first of all, the camera or the projector that's putting out the HDMI or the HD
Okay, well,
output
look at
on,
this one.
that's twice the resolution just about as the RGB monitor that's coming out, because that's an NTSC 720/46. That's a 1080i.
Okay.
What that means is,
Let's focus our attention on this one, then. What can we see here?
basically what it is a reflection from the cornea, and it's interesting because if it was not in the middle of the pupil, we would not have got that kind of photo. What it is, if I may stand,
You may stand.
it's basically a camera being fired from this position, or maybe like looking at the viewfinder from this position. And the reason you can tell that is because of the center of the flash, and you can see,
The center of the flash, is that what we see here?
right, and you can see the chromatic aberrations around that, which are the colors. And that's basically what you can see. I can see a little bit more of it on, that's a fairly low, the next slide's a little more higher, it's a little higher resolution.
Okay.
But can you recognize who the person is taking the photo? No, there's not enough a PPI, which is pixels per inch. All it is representing that somebody is taking a photo of Mr. Alexander with the camera held about chest height.
And we can tell the height relative to the cornea, correct? The height, the level of the camera relative to the cornea, to some degree?
I'm not sure what you mean.
Well, you mentioned you stood up and you demonstrated to us how you could see that the photograph was being taken.
It would actually be more like this.
Okay.
Okay. So I don't know the height of Mr. Alexander, and I don't know the height of Miss Arias, so it'd be purely speculative.
Let me show you what's been marked as Exhibit 3, if I may approach.
You may.
Could you describe for us what we see in the exhibit I've just shown you?
It's the same image, only instead of 72 dpi, it's been taken up to 2,880 dpi, it's actually to make it easier to work with. And let me backtrack one of the reasons we do that. In Clear ID, on a digital camera, I don't know if any of you had a computer screen or a digital camera where you notice there's maybe one white dot or something on your computer screen that's always there.
Okay.
It's called a dead pixel. First thing I have to do is go through the luminance tracks and the RGB channels of the CCD chip to see if there's any bad pixels before I blow it up. And it's a lot easier to do that at this magnification. Okay. So I went through each color channel and able to look for dead pixels, because if there were some, I would have to blow it out. And I was able to do that and get in Clear ID, going through each individual channel, and didn't find any what we call dead pixels.
Be moving to exhibit number 3.
No objection.
Exhibit 3 is admitted for purposes of this hearing only.
And Your Honor, if Mr. Neumeister could.
Yes, you may
Stand.
step down.
Doesn't look like it comes up very well at all on the big screen, so let me go over here.
Yes, it's because of the resolution of the monitor. We definitely need to play it back on the 1080.
Okay.
And actually, in my lab, it's twice the resolution of that.
Okay, so what we're seeing here is half, if you will, as good as what we could see, or what the jury could see if they were in your lab. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And now what we see here is the same flash area, correct?
It's the same picture. The only difference is It was up-res to 2880 DPI, and that was for me to do a little bit of just testing to make sure there weren't bad pixels and whatnot. It does give me a little more latitude as far as working pixel by pixel, looking at it to make sure there's, like I say, what becomes critical. Let's say, for example, somebody has a mole on their face, but there's a dead pixel in a camera, and it looks like there's a dot on a person's face. It could be caused by the camera rather than actually being on a person's face. I've had that in cases, actually, where there was a bad pixel. Okay. So I wanted to make sure that all the pixels were good, so I worked at 2880, which is not unusual in these cases.
Okay. And what you were able to discern, I believe, from what you told us before from looking at this, is that there were no dead pixels.
I only looked at that. I did not look at the entire picture. I just looked at the part that was asked to enlarge.
Okay. And so your focus here is in this area of the cornea, correct?
Actually, in the pupil area.
Pupil area, I'm sorry. And based on this, do you begin to see more in this picture than merely the flash?
Yes, but again, I was able to actually trace what I was able to see in the studio to make it. I knew we'd run into the situation in court where we don't have the equipment to really show everything there is to show. Again, that's why homicide comes out a lot to our lab, to look and see what's really there. So I did an outline, a rough outline of what I can see in the lab.
Okay, let me show you then, regarding that outline, if I may approach, Your Honor, what has been marked as Exhibit 4 for purposes of this hearing. If you could take a look at that, is that the same photograph, but instead with the outlines of what you referred to?
Yes.
And I would move to admit Exhibit 4 for purposes of this hearing.
No objection.
4 is admitted for purposes of this hearing.
And Mr. Newmeister, if you would.
You're on.
Yes, sir. You may step down.
What you've done for purposes of demonstration here is that you've shown us a figure that is visible on your equipment but not visible, completely as visible here, of a person holding a camera, correct?
I think the difference would be equated to the difference of what's being up on the overhead as opposed to what's on the HD screen. It's quite a bit of difference, so double that, and yes.
Okay. And this outlining you've done, that's not an alteration to the photograph, is that correct?
No, the only thing that was changed on it, the light level, the overall, what you call brightness, was cranked up by about 19%. In other words, it made it easier for me to see. When you get into low pixel resolution or low PPI, the first thing that begins to drop out are what are called the black values, the darker values on, if you put it on a vector scope or on a waveform scope, the lower values drop out first. So in order to be able to actually trace it more clearly, I enhanced the brightness, which again is nothing fancy, just so I could trace it more easily.
As it relates to what we see here, we see the figure with the arm up. We see an area up here with light. Can we speculate as to what that is?
Can you point that out?
The area above here where it looks like the head or shoulder?
Oh, it looks like, if I'm seeing what you're pointing at, it looks like, again, there's a thing called blown out, which means when there's too much light on the subject, the white values tend to bloom.
Okay.
So it looks like a blown out, it looks like the face, blown out face, and to a screen right of that would be the hair.
Now, As it relates to this enhancement or enlargement, this exhibit dictates that it is at 2880 DPI. Is there further enhancements you can make to the photograph without altering it?
Could I make it cleaner? Yes, but it wouldn't be Daubert standards because there's a very good chance that I'd be creating an image rather than enhancing. And with license plates or very often, again, with homicide, they'll want to see everything they can, and I'll show everything I can. But as far as what I can present in court, I can only take it so far and stay within not creating an image.
And this is as far as you felt like you could take it without making any alterations and or creating an image. Is that correct?
I stayed on the conservative side. I actually did a few others. I went up to 7,500 DPI, and I didn't really see any benefits for it. I did HDR, which is high dynamic contrast pixel stacking, just for my own edification. I knew that it wouldn't be admissible, but I just wanted to see what I could see. And yes, I could see a little more, but I don't think it would be good evidence.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
Cross-examination.
Sir, you indicated that you testified before. How many other times have you testified? Let's start with Maricopa County Superior Court.
I would say about a dozen or so.
And what areas have you addressed in your testimony in those dozen or so times that you testified here in Maricopa County Superior Court?
Mostly video and
Well, no, let's be specific. The last time that you testified here actually wasn't video, was it?
you're talking about in this court.
I'm talking
Yeah, it was
about
audio.
Let's do it this way. I'll ask the questions and you can give me the answers. In terms of testifying in court, when was the last time that you believe you testified in court?
It would be on this case.
Did that have anything to do with video that you testified to?
Objection is to vagueness. Are you talking about this case or another trial?
Sustained.
Well, sir, what are you talking about?
Can you re-ask the question?
No. I'm asking the question is, when was the last time that you testified in Maricopa County Superior Court?
In this case earlier on.
And what did you testify to in this case in Maricopa County Superior Court? What did you testify about?
I enhanced the audio for this particular case.
That has nothing to do with video, correct?
That's correct.
And in fact, part of the reason that you testified in enhancing the audio, the motivation for you was that so you could become qualified as an expert to testify with regard to audio, correct?
Objection is to relevance.
I have testified an awful lot to audio.
I'm not asking that. I'm asking whether or not you had ever testified previously in any court as to the work that you did in this case previously.
Objection is to relevance. The apples and oranges. If he wanted to challenge his audio qualifications, he could have done so at the time.
Overruled. You may answer.
One more time, Juan.
Sir, with regard to what you testified previously, isn't it true that the motivation for you testifying involving the audio was so that you could be qualified as an expert in that area?
I've testified numerous times.
So the answer is no?
The answer is no.
So what other case have you ever testified to audio enhancement such as the one that you attempted to testify about in this case?
Again, objection, if the court recalls, Mr. Martinez stipulated to the fact that that was Mr. Alexander and Ms. Harris's voice on the recording. Now he seems to be attempting to relitigate it in a separate proceeding.
Counsel, please. Overruled. You may proceed.
So, sir, with regard to this audio enhancing, what other cases have you testified to?
I've worked on many, many audio cases. The last case I would testify for was for your office with Eric on a shooting as to the decibel pressure of a gun.
I'm not asking about the decimal pressure of gun. I'm asking about the audio recording. You indicated that previously that you've testified in other cases involving audio recordings. What case was that? Just tell me the name of that case.
The name of the case, again, I've got 29 homicides right now. I work 7 days a week. The name of that case, I could look it up, but I could tell you it was an audio case because they wanted to hear what was going on in the background in the conversations before the shooting occurred. In fact, I've just been retained by your office again on another case.
I understand you want to tell us that you were retained by our office. What I hear you telling me is that you can't tell us the name of the case, right?
Not offhand, no. Again, I don't get very involved.
How long ago was it, sir, that you testified in that case, supposedly?
Well, it wasn't supposedly, I did. It was a few months ago,
Okay.
and I don't know the date.
What was the name of the judge?
Objection, is there any relevance to this, Judge?
I'd have to look at my notes again.
And did you testify for the prosecution or for the defense?
Prosecution.
And what was the name of the prosecutor?
Eric.
Well, I thought you just told us that with regard to Mr. Bostad, you testified about something different. What was it that you testified to in the case involving Mr. Bostad?
There was a gunshot, and they wanted to hear what the audio was between the conversation of the people before the gunshot.
And that was the time that you testified previous to this, correct?
Yes, again, most of my work
that's
is
yes.
lab work.
So that's yes, correct? That is the previous time that you testified, correct?
I've been at quite a few, I've done quite a few of the evidentiary hearings. I don't know if you'd call that testifying.
However you want to, before a jury, let's define it that way, okay?
Okay.
Have you testified in any other area? We know you're testifying about enhancement here, and then we also know you testified about some audio issues previously. What other areas have you testified to in the past?
Video.
And by video, what are you talking about?
Usually we do a lot of enhancement of, for example, surveillance videos. We get a lot of calls for that. For example, the Phoenix Homicide just called me a while, well, I get quite a few for Phoenix Homicide, where they need a small piece of video blown up into something they can use. Most of the time what we do is called frame averaging, where we compile video and make good stills
what
of
you
it.
do, not what we do, if you don't mind. What it is that you do.
I have equipment that the police department doesn't have, and it further enables them to use, for example, photos or pieces of video that are cleaner than they can come up with.
So there's only two areas in which you've been qualified as an expert, sound and then audio, correct?
No, I've testified on pictures because a lot of times the pictures that I've lifted have been lifted from video. And what they've done is I've frame averaged the video to create still pictures.
So that involves pictures, which is what this case is about, and then also audio. So are those the only two areas in which you've testified?
Audio, video, and pictures.
And that's it?
That's correct.
Sir, you also indicated that you are working for the city of Mesa. What are you doing for the city of Mesa?
I'm representing the Mesa Police Department in a shooting in a civil case. It's two officers involved in a shooting against a civilian. It was a fatal.
I understand that, but what are you doing in that case? What kind of expertise are you lending to that case? What are you doing?
I enhanced the audio from the officers' mics, so they wanted to hear what the gentleman in the background, the person who was shot, was saying, and they wanted that enhanced, so I did that.
And in this case, what you did is you enhanced what is the left eye of Mr. Alexander, correct?
I didn't enhance it, I enlarged it.
You enlarged the eye of Mr. Alexander, correct?
Correct.
And one of the things that you did with regard to that is that you then drew some lines, and we're looking at exhibit number 4, correct? Is that yes?
I don't know if it's number 4, but that's what we're looking at.
Well, then this is the one I'm holding. You see that? This is number 4.
Okay.
And These are the lines that you drew, correct?
Correct.
Your eyes with corrective lenses are what?
20/20.
And do you see better than anybody else who has 20/20 vision?
We have better equipment, almost
I'm not
double.
asking about the equipment. I'm asking about what you see with your eyes.
No?
And if you were to present this evidence to the jury, you would, of course, for example, have exhibit number 3 available, wouldn't you? Correct?
Yes.
And if we take a look at exhibit number 3, that's the one that doesn't include your lines on it, right?
Correct, but it'd be better to be looking at it on HD than on the RGB.
I understand that, but exhibit number 3 just shows us the same photograph without the lines on it, right?
Actually, what's the marking on exhibit number 3? What's the DPI marking?
It just says exhibit number 3 on it.
It should say on the front how many DPIs. On the actual photo, there should be a marking. Yes, correct.
Okay, now you've looked at it,
Yeah,
it doesn't have any markings on it.
yes.
Isn't it true, sir, that if we were to show that to other people, they could disagree with you about these markings that are here, couldn't they?
Sure.
So that, and there's no scientific test, for example, that we could apply so that we could take a look at exhibit number 4, for example, and verify that your lines are accurately drawn as to what may or may not be in the background, right?
Well, what we could do is I could actually
No,
put
sir.
up,
No, sir, I'm asking, is there a test that we could administer, like a cancer test, that we could administer so that we could determine whether or not your lines are drawn correctly?
there are procedures where we could use magnetic lasso attached to luminance and chromatic values.
So you're saying that everybody who looks at this photograph would draw the exact same lines. Is that what you're saying?
I would say if they had the equipment I had and they were asked to trace what I had, yes.
So for example, assuming that my eyes were 20/20, and I said to you, and I'm looking at exhibit number 3, I don't see anything that you have here.
Mm-hmm.
Would you have any reason to dispute what my eyes were seeing?
Overruled.
I would say you're not looking at it through the equipment I have been able to look at it for.
Well, but the equipment isn't here for the jury to see, is it?
Right,
Yes or no?
but if you're looking at it on that monitor, it's much better than on the RGB monitor.
And these are your lines, again, if
Yes.
I were to say to you, I'm looking at that, with all the enhancements in the world, I can't see it. You wouldn't be able to dispute that, would you?
And that would be up to the jury.
That's right, it would be up to the jury to decide what they see, not you, right?
That's correct. I
I
just,
don't have anything else, thank you.
Redirect.
Mr. Newmeister, let's talk a little bit about the capabilities and what we have up on your on the screen from your projector is what's been marked as Exhibit 4 for purposes of this hearing. Sir, it seems that there are limitations, if you will, as to what we can see here versus what we would see in your lab, correct?
yes, we have about twice the resolution.
Okay. And earlier when we were speaking, you discussed how using what we see up on the screen here, this standard definition type display, what we see on the wall screen and the court equipment, what you would see in your lab is what we see on your screen is twice as good as this, and what we would see in your lab would be twice as good as what we see from your projector, right?
That's correct.
Okay. And when we say twice as good, of course, are you talking about estimating pixels, or how do you come to that determination, twice as good?
It's twice 1080. 1080 would be HD. It's twice 1080 resolution.
Okay, well, I see 2880 DPI on this.
That's just the printing resolution. That has nothing to do with the actual viewing of the equipment.
Okay. And so even though we have this picture that shows this DPI dust per inch, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Even though we have this photograph showing the DPI, what we see here projected is certainly not as good because we don't have the equipment to view it in that way, correct?
Correct.
Okay. The best evidence then, if we were to, you were asked about what people might see, what Mr. Martinez might see, et cetera, with their vision. The best evidence of what anybody would see on their own would come from viewing it at your lab, in front of your equipment, correct?
As an example, Detective Butcher has a triple homicide. There was a cold case, and they weren't able to make out what kind of vehicles were involved in the two suspect vehicles, and we were able to, she was able to bring up the evidence. We were able to bring in an expert and enhance it enough so they could tell exactly what make, model, and year the vehicles were, which was a good, and that was last week.
And that was something visible in your lab that wasn't visible
They
elsewhere?
weren't able to see that, no.
Okay. And so what you've done here, realistically then, is a visualization or demonstration, if you will, of what a juror, and I know we can't, Mr. Martinez is talking to you about psychic, abilities, trying to discern what somebody would say, but reasonably speaking, what you have here in these lines is an alternative to somebody
Just need to hit the space bar. There you go. Thank you.
to somebody being in your laboratory, correct?
I would say that what I have done is actually, it helps the juror to see what I can see. Can you recognize, it's a fairly straightforward thing. What it is the reflection, it's light bouncing off the back of the shower wall, illuminating the person taking the picture. The only reason we're able to see the facial and hair is because the camera was held lower. Can you identify who's in the picture? No.
No. You could just identify that there's a person holding a camera like this about a few feet from Mr. Alexander, right?
That's correct, and that would be just a simple logical conclusion.
Thank you, Mr. Neumeister.
You may step down.
Thank you.